He tied her to a tree in the forest and left, but what the wolf did next shocked everyone. The forest stood still in anticipation. Moonlight slid across the icy crust of snow, casting a deceptive illusion of calm. The trees were motionless, their shadows stretching along the trail, disappearing into the night's depths. The air was bitterly cold. A coarse rope bit into her wrist, cutting off any movement. Her hands had long gone numb. Inside her chest, a trapped creature pounded wildly, and breathing grew harder. Every inhale felt like torture. Somewhere deep within, a faint warmth flickered, the last hope that it could still be stopped, that someone might come, that it wasn't too late. But she wasn't alone. She knew it even before she saw him. A barely perceptible presence pressed down on her mind, foreign, heavy. Someone was watching. Someone was waiting. The wolf. He stood in the shadows, blending into the night's darkness. A dark silhouette, motionless. Only his eyes, two amber glows, flickered faintly from the forest's depths. He didn't blink. He didn't move. Then, gently, he shifted his weight from paw to paw, and his body slid into the moonlight. He was enormous. His thick fur looked black, though if the sun were out, it would have revealed subtle shades beneath. His ears were pinned back against his skull, his lips trembled slightly, bearing teeth woven from night's very breath. Elena struggled to breathe evenly. Her fear didn't just paralyze her, it consumed her entirely. This wasn't the fear that comes from logical danger, this was something older, encoded into her blood, an ancient, animal knowledge that a predator stood near, one that could end her existence with a single motion. She couldn't run. The wolf knew it. Time slowed. He sniffed at her, not closely, but moving his nose in the air, taking in her scent. The hairs on the back of her neck rose. She didn't remember when she began to scream. The sound burst from her chest, a piercing shriek of pure terror, untouched by thought. It tore from deep within, from the place where primitive fears lived before they had words. The wolf flinched. His ears twitched. His lips curled higher, revealing gleaming white teeth. A faint crunch of snow under his paws. He stepped forward. Elena froze. The forest fell silent again, dark, endless, and impossibly deep. You're on a channel with original stories. All names and places have been changed. Subscribe, like, and watch till the end. We begin. Memories rushed in like a sudden warm wind, so jarring against the frozen terror of the present. There had been winter nights in her past too, but those were different. They were filled with candlelight, the scent of burning wood, and the warm voices of her parents. Elena and Mark had been born in a small house on the forest's edge. Their father, Nikolai, was a hunter, but not the kind shown in old books. He didn't kill for sport. He believed the forest was alive and that every animal had its place. For him, hunting was not a game, but a survival art. He never took more than necessary and always with respect. Their mother, Anna, was a biologist. She could talk for hours about the lives of animals, turning even the simplest fox print in the snow into an unfolding story. During the day, she and their father went into the forest. In the evenings, they gathered the children by the fireplace and shared what they'd seen. The forest is a book, their mother would say as she ran her fingers through Elena's hair. Every track is a word. Learning to read it means understanding animals better than people. Mark, always more impatient, would try to guess whose track they'd found on their morning walks. Once, he pointed to a deep print near a frozen stream and declared proudly, "It's a bear." "It's a dog," their father chuckled. "No, It's definitely a bear," Mark insisted, frowning. Their father knelt beside him, examining the track. "All right, let's check. If it's a bear, the track should be larger than your palm. Place your hand on it." Mark did, and it turned out to be almost the same size. He looked embarrassed. "You see," his father smiled, "you were right about the shape. But you forgot the size. Learn the details, and you'll become a true tracker." Since childhood, Elena had felt the forest was more than just a place to walk, it was part of their family, woven into their memories. Every night before bed, their mother told them stories, not of kings and princes, but of wolves. "Wolves aren't evil beasts like in fairy tales," she'd whisper, sitting at the edge of the bed. "They're loyal. They care for their packs. They never abandon their own." Elena especially loved the story of the little lost wolf pup who was taken in by an old wise wolf who taught him how to survive. "Mama," Mark asked once, "can wolves have friends who are people?" Their mother thought for a moment. "Rarely," she said. "But sometimes, if a wolf and a person meet at just the right moment, if both are lonely, they might understand each other." They didn't know how prophetic those words would be. When their parents died in a car accident, the forest became the only place Elena and Mark felt alive. They couldn't leave it. Everything they had learned and dreamed of brought them here, to the Carpathians. The reserve became their refuge, their home. Here, they could be themselves. Here, wolves were safe. But safety is always an illusion that shattered when Damian entered their lives like a gust of wind from distant lands. It was late autumn. Frost had already gripped the forest, and icy fog rose over the mountains like a thick curtain. Elena and Mark were returning from a village where they'd gathered supplies. They rarely left the reserve, but sometimes it was necessary. On the way back, near their land's edge, they saw him, standing by his jeep, hood open, clearly stalled, examining the engine with a mix of irritation and confusion. He was tall, broad-shouldered, in his 30s, with sharp features, short dark hair, and storm-gray eyes. There was something unsettling about him. "Having trouble?" Elena called out as she stepped from the car, as if they were old acquaintances. "Looks like the battery's dead," he replied, with a faint accent she couldn't place. "Damian," he said, offering his hand. "Elena," she replied automatically, shaking it. "And this is my brother, Mark." Mark didn't respond, just gave a curt nod and tightened his lips. Elena thought nothing of it. They helped Damian tow his car to their workshop. That night, he stayed in one of their guest rooms. They never turned travelers away. The next morning, Damian smiled over coffee, thanked them for the help, and promised to repay their kindness. He stayed another 2 days, then another week, and then began to appear more and more often. Elena fell for him quickly, too quickly. He was different. Smart, witty, confident. He listened to her with genuine interest. He knew almost as much about wildlife as she did, but he saw things differently. He had an unusual outlook on life, as if he understood it from another side. "Wolves are perfect survival machines," he told her one evening by the fire. "They don't wage wars, they don't destroy the world that feeds them. They just exist. Unlike us." "Unlike you," she smiled. He looked at her, said nothing, and then kissed her. Mark watched it all with a dark expression. He didn't trust Damian. "He's not who he says he is," he told her once at dinner, when Damian had left for a few days. "You just don't want me to be happy," she snapped. She truly believed that. Her brother was always too cautious, distrusting strangers and resisting change. That's not it, Mark sighed, putting down his fork. People like him shouldn't be trusted. You don't even know him. But he knows us. That comment struck her. She brushed off the worry, but somewhere deep inside, unease had already settled. It grew stronger weeks later. One night, she heard Damian talking on the phone. He was outside, but his voice carried faintly through the window. Elena didn't recognize the language. It wasn't English, French, or German. The words were short, sharp, almost hissing. She didn't know what disturbed her more, the language itself, or the cold, calm tone he used. She thought there was something hidden in his tone, that he was simply speaking in his native language. Maybe he had a family somewhere far away. But then he saw her reflection in the glass and stopped the conversation. "Everything's all right?" he asked, stepping inside. Elena nodded, though she felt that nothing was all right. But she told herself she was just overthinking it. Back then, she had no idea how wrong she was. The night was quiet, everything stood still, the snow muffled all sounds, and even the wind had calmed, as if observing something important. Elena couldn't sleep. Thoughts about Damian, about Mark, about that unsettling conversation she had overheard swirled in her head. Something in it wouldn't let her rest. She told herself she was exaggerating, that she just wasn't used to strangers in her life, but the feeling that the ice beneath her feet was cracking never left her. She stepped out onto the porch, inhaled the cold air, trying to calm down. The reserve at night was entirely different, nothing like it was during the day. It felt like the darkness breathed differently, as if the trees were watching her, hiding things in their shadows that shouldn't be there. And then she saw two figures in the clearing between the trees, two men standing. One was Damian. The other was a man Elena didn't recognize. She wanted to call out to Damian, but something stopped her. Maybe it was his posture, too tense, too ready to attack. Maybe it was the lantern in his hand, lighting up the stranger's face. She decided to watch. The conversation was brief. "You don't understand who you're playing with," the man said, his voice trembling with rage. Damian calmly replied, "It's you who doesn't understand." Something in his voice made a chill run down Elena's spine. "I'll pay," the man said quickly. "I just need a little more time." Damian shook his head slowly, like a wolf tracking prey. A red patch formed on the snow. A quiet moan, and then silence. The man collapsed to the ground, and Damian stood over him, wiping his knife on the man's coat. Elena couldn't breathe. She knew she should scream, should run, but her legs were rooted to the porch floor, her gaze fixed on what had just happened. Damian looked up. He saw her. And everything changed. He didn't look afraid. He wasn't shocked. Not a single muscle on his face flinched. He slowly wiped his hands on his jacket and stepped forward. "Come down," he said. Elena didn't move. "Come down, Elena," he repeated. His voice was soft but left no room for refusal. She took a step down. Then another. Her legs trembled when they stood face to face. He leaned in, almost gently. "I don't know what you saw," he said quietly. "But if you betray me..." His fingers brushed her cheek lightly. "I will find you. Always." He said it like he was making a vow. Fear gripped her throat. She could have run, could have fled into the forest, woken Mark, called the police, but something stopped her. Because he wasn't afraid. He knew she wouldn't leave. And he was right. The days after that night dragged on, thick like a rotting swamp. Elena didn't know how to go on living next to Damian, knowing who he really was. But fear was stronger than logic. She tried not to think, not to remember, pretended nothing had happened. It was easier that way. He was calm, emotionless, unshaken. And it was even easier to believe that if she stayed quiet, didn't reveal her fear, he would leave her alone. But he knew. "You've changed," he said one day, when she was clearing the table without looking up. She gripped the plate so hard her knuckles turned white. He didn't look away, and she knew he could feel her fear. When the men in uniform arrived, she knew it was the end. Interpol. They had been looking for Damian for years. And they found him. Elena saw it in his eyes. He sat in the chair as if nothing had happened. He didn't move when the officers burst in. He even smirked. And then his gaze fell on her. She understood. He thought she had betrayed him. And then the nightmare began. He struck her first, with an open palm, fast and sharp. Then with his fist. She fell, feeling warm blood drip onto the wooden floor. Everything blurred, but she saw the police didn't interfere. They gave him time. He crouched beside her. "It was you," he said calmly. She couldn't speak, just swallowed blood in her mouth. "I knew you'd betray me," he whispered, lifting her chin with his fingers. "Everyone does." Through the haze of pain, she heard the officers talking behind him. They gave him exactly as much time as he wanted. Then they grabbed him, twisted his arms, and began to take him out. As they led him toward the door, he bent down to her and whispered, "This isn't the end." And she knew he wasn't lying. Elena died that day when Damian was taken away in handcuffs, or at least that's how it felt. That night, when the police left her bloodied, deciding whether or not she should even get up, she understood one thing: she had nowhere to run. She could hide, change her documents. But that didn't mean he would forget. Damian would not forget. He said, "This isn't the end," and she believed him. A month later, her name was Anna Koval. She moved deep into the Carpathians, to the place her parents once dreamed of turning into a nature reserve. Now it was her refuge. There were no hunters here. No noise. No shadows following her. It seemed like she was finally free, but the silence was deafening. When you live in fear, under constant tension, adrenaline becomes your drug. Without it, it feels like you no longer exist. The reserve became her salvation and her prison. The wolves were the only ones who asked nothing of her. They didn't ask questions, didn't look at her with pity, didn't want to uncover her secrets. Elena, now Anna, spent her days watching the packs, studying them, recording observations. There was the shadow pack, always distant, cautious, nearly invisible. And the hunter pack, strong, brave, fiercely territorial. She was among them, but not with them. Until she met him. It was a cold day when she found the wolf pup. At first, she only heard a faint whimper, barely audible through the howling wind. In a snowy hollow, he lay, small, thin, with matted blood on his paws. Poachers. Anna had seen it before. They killed his mother, perhaps his whole pack, but for some reason left him to die slowly. He didn't move when she approached, only twitched his ear slightly. She picked him up gently and pressed him to her chest. "It's okay," she whispered. She didn't know if he would survive, but she knew one thing: she wouldn't let him die alone. The pup lived. He grew, gained strength. He didn't trust her. For weeks, he only ate from her hands. Any sudden move, and he'd recoil, pin his ears, bare his teeth. She didn't pressure him. She was simply there. And one night, when she stepped outside, he came and sat beside her, just sat, as if he had always been there. That's when she understood she was part of the pack now too. But she didn't yet know how deeply he would change her fate. It was a quiet day. Late autumn had arrived in the Carpathians, that moment when the forest holds its breath before winter. The leaves had fallen, leaving the trees bare. Snow hadn't yet covered the ground, but everything felt frozen, slowed down, as if nature was taking one final deep breath before the long freeze. Elena sat on the porch, sipping hot tea, watching the wolves stroll lazily along the distant hill. They were relaxed, exchanging glances. He had grown into a powerful animal, confident, strong, with fur the color of the midnight sky and eyes that sometimes glinted with something far too aware. He didn't leave, like wolves usually do when raised by humans. He stayed. Sometimes she wondered why. Maybe he knew. She still needed protection. That day, Mark showed up unexpectedly. He rarely came to the reserve, he loved city life too much, though he continued to help her with whatever she needed, bringing documents, handling supply issues. But today, he looked strange. He got out of the car slowly, his lips pressed into a thin line, and handed her an envelope. "This is from the police," he said quietly. Elena took it, but her hands were already trembling. She didn't know yet what it contained, but she felt it. She tore the paper open, pulled out the letter, and read. Mark watched her face, waiting for the moment she understood. She did. Damian had escaped. She sat on the porch for a long time, clutching the sheet of paper. The printed words seemed distant, as if they weren't about her. But her body already knew. She felt fear return, tightening around her chest. It wasn't fear of Damian as a man, it was fear of inevitability. She knew he would come. He had told her that, just before they took him away, this isn't the end. She had lied to herself, believing he would disappear, that even if he escaped, he would have other concerns, that he would forget her. But she knew he wouldn't. He would find her. "You have to leave," Mark said. They sat at the kitchen table. Elena wasn't eating. She couldn't. She stared out the window at the distant hills, at the shadows moving between the trees. "And go where?" Her voice was hoarse. "To another country. Far away." She smiled faintly. "You think he won't find me?" Mark said nothing. She looked at him. "He's a hunter." That was true. Damian never let go of his prey. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark, listening to the wind, straining to catch every sound. The wolf lay at her door, as always, sensing her anxiety. She turned onto her side and closed her eyes. She knew time was running out. Mark left early in the morning, he was going to check the traps. Poaching had increased recently. He and Elena had found signs of intruders more than once, a destroyed wolf den, traps left in unexpected places. "I won't be long," he said, buttoning his coat. "Be careful," Elena replied, not looking up. She watched him walk toward the forest, then returned to her tasks. Outside, it was cold, too cold. That moment between autumn and winter when the air already bites the skin, but the snow hasn't yet fallen. The day dragged on lazily. But when the sun began to dip below the horizon, Elena noticed that Mark hadn't returned. She checked the clock. He'd been gone too long. At first, she didn't worry. She knew he could get delayed, maybe something important came up. Maybe. Another 2 hours passed. The sky darkened. Anxiety tightened in her chest. She picked up the radio. "Mark, do you hear me?" "Only static." "Mark, answer me." Silence. Elena clenched her teeth. She tried not to think the worst, but deep down, she already knew something had happened. She gathered her things quickly: warm clothes, rifle over her shoulder, a knife, spare batteries. She had always been ready for things like this. Her wolf stood beside her, watching. He made no sound, but she knew he felt her fear. When she stepped outside, he followed. Mark's trail wasn't hard to follow: faint impressions in the soft earth, broken branches. Elena moved quickly until the tracks abruptly stopped. Nearby, there were other footprints, human. Unfamiliar. Her heart sank. She crouched, examining them. The tracks were fresh, no more than a few hours old. She looked ahead. The edge of the forest was dark, silent. Then she saw the blood. She didn't remember running, everything blurred into one. The trees, the icy air, the crunch of branches beneath her boots. She followed the blood trail deeper into the woods. And then she found him. Mark lay in the snow. His eyes were open, but they saw nothing. One shot to the chest. Another to the head. A final one, to be sure. Elena pressed a hand to her mouth. The world narrowed to a single point. The silence was absolute. Only her heartbeat roared in her ears. Then, she felt it. Someone was behind her. Before she could turn, a blow to the head sent her into darkness. Consciousness returned slowly. First, a dull ringing in her ears, like wind howling in distant mountains. Then sharp pain in the back of her head, throbbing, stretching, as if fingers were gripping her skull. Then the cold, penetrating, sticky. Elena jerked, but couldn't move. Her hands were bound. She opened her eyes slightly. The world swam, but through the haze, she saw trees, tall, black silhouettes against the white snow. And in front of her, a shadow. Slow, unhurried footsteps. A man stepped from the darkness. "Hello, Elena." The voice had a hint of mockery. She froze. He was here. Damian. She wasn't surprised. She had known he would come. She had known it would end like this. "Didn't expect to see me?" He bent closer, studying her like a hunter sizing up prey. She looked at him, silent. His eyes were calm, no anger, no hatred. Just cold certainty. "I searched for you a long time," he continued, crouching before her. "You're good at running, better than I thought." He took a strand of her hair, letting it slip through his fingers. "But you knew I'd find you. Didn't you?" She said nothing. "And now what?" she finally asked. He smiled. "Now," he stood up, stepped back. "Now we begin." He pulled out a knife. The steel glinted in the moonlight. "You betrayed me, Elena." His voice was soft, almost tender. "I thought a long time about how to punish you." He ran the blade across his palm, drawing a thin red line. "I could just kill you. But that's too boring." He stepped closer. "But if I take my time?" She didn't look away. She wouldn't show fear. At that moment, something changed. Damian froze. Elena saw it, the tension in his shoulders, the stillness in his eyes. He felt it too. She heard it then, soft, barely audible footsteps. And from the forest, he emerged. Large. Dark. Like the night itself. The wolf moved silently, like a shadow. His amber eyes glowed. He stopped a few steps away. He didn't attack. Just stared. Elena recognized him. It was him, the pup she had once saved. Damian smirked, shaking his head. A wolf. He looked mockingly at Elena. You think he'll help you? He raised the knife, then slowly drove it into the snow before him. Fine. Let's see. The wolf didn't move. He remembered. Damian stepped toward him. Well, beast. Come on. He spread his arms, taunting. What will you do? The wolf stayed still. Damian smirked, bent to grab the knife. And the wolf attacked. It happened in an instant. A blur of darkness, merging with the night. The wolf's jaws clamped onto his shoulder. A scream tore through the forest. Damian fell back, flailing, but the wolf was faster. He lunged for the throat. One powerful shake. The body hit the snow. Elena turned away. The screams died quickly. Silence returned. Only the crunch of snow as the wolf stepped back, panting. She looked at Damian's still body. She didn't know how much time had passed. Eventually, the wolf turned slowly and walked into the forest. She was alone. She watched his silhouette disappear into the dark. And she understood, sometimes, animals are more human than people. Elena walked along the snow-covered path, leaving light tracks behind. The snow crunched underfoot. The air was crisp and cold. She was alone, but now, loneliness didn't frighten her. The night was clear. Stars burned high above the Carpathians, reflecting in the frozen tree branches. The world was silent, but in that silence, there was no fear. Only peace. She stopped, staring into the dark silhouettes of trees ahead. Somewhere out there, in the shadows, he was there. He had returned to the night, as a wolf should. And yet, she felt his presence. Then she heard it. A long, deep howl carrying over the mountains. Then another. And another. The pack. She stood, listening to the sound, feeling it fill her, seep into the depths of her soul. There was something familiar in that howl. She smiled. Looked one last time toward the forest. Then turned and walked on.